David Williams pulled into the parking lot of First Community Bank, his silver Honda Accord finding a spot between a minivan and a pickup truck. The afternoon sun was warm on his face as he stepped out, still wearing the casual clothes he'd thrown on for his daughter's soccer game earlier that morning. Jeans, a navy blue polo shirt, and comfortable sneakers. Not exactly CEO attire, but then again he hadn't planned on making any business stops today. The sound of children's laughter from the nearby park reminded him of Lily's excited squeal when her team scored the winning goal. At 8 years old, she was already showing the determination that ran in their family. Her grandmother had slipped her a crisp $50 bill after the game, whispering that it was for something special and making Lily promise to put it in her savings account. That's what brought David here on this Saturday afternoon. He could have waited until Monday, could have asked his assistant to handle it or even used the mobile app. But there was something important about teaching Lily the value of walking into a bank, talking to real people, and making her deposit in person. These were lessons his own father had taught him years ago, back when $50 felt like a fortune. First Community Bank had been David's vision 15 years ago. He'd started with a small community branch, focusing on serving neighborhoods that bigger banks often ignored. Through careful growth, smart partnerships, and a genuine commitment to helping people build better financial futures, the bank had expanded to 47 locations across 3 states. David took pride in knowing that his institution had helped thousands of families buy their first homes, start small businesses, and secure their retirement dreams. The downtown branch was one of his favorites. It sat on a corner where the business district met a diverse residential area, serving everyone from young professionals grabbing lunch-hour banking to elderly couples managing their retirement accounts. The building itself was welcoming rather than intimidating. Large windows, comfortable seating areas, and artwork from local artists on the walls. As he walked through the glass doors, David felt the familiar satisfaction of seeing his vision in action. The branch was busy but not crowded, with about a dozen customers conducting their Saturday banking. A young mother was opening what looked like a college savings account for her toddler. An elderly gentleman was speaking with a loan officer about refinancing options. 2 teenagers were at the counter, probably depositing paychecks from their weekend jobs. The weekend staff was smaller than weekdays, of course. 3 teller windows were open, and David could see the branch manager's office was occupied. He recognized none of the faces, which wasn't unusual. With nearly 800 employees across all locations, and weekend shifts often staffed by part-time workers or newer hires, it would be impossible to know everyone personally. David joined the line behind a woman who was making what sounded like a business deposit, judging by her conversation with the teller about daily cash receipts. The wait gave him a chance to observe the operation from a customer's perspective, something he tried to do regularly, though usually with advance notice to branch managers. The lobby was clean and well organized. The customer service representatives were polite and professional. The wait times seemed reasonable. All good signs. David made mental notes about a few small improvements. The informational brochures could be better organized, and one of the pens at the writing station had run out of ink. But overall, he was pleased with what he saw. The line moved steadily forward. David found himself behind a college-age student who was nervously asking about student loan options. The young man was clearly overwhelmed by the process, and David was impressed by how patiently the teller explained the different programs available. This was exactly the kind of customer service he'd built the bank to provide. When his turn finally came, David approached the middle window where a young woman with blonde hair and a friendly smile was waiting. Her name tag read, Jennifer, and she looked like she'd been working there for maybe 6 months, based on how she still consulted her computer screen for routine transactions. "Good afternoon," David said, pulling out his wallet. "I'd like to make a deposit to my daughter's savings account." "Of course," Jennifer replied, her voice pleasant and professional. "I'll just need to see some identification and the account information." David handed over his driver's license and pulled out the deposit slip he'd filled out in the car. The account number was memorized. He'd opened Lily's account on her 6th birthday, and they made deposits together regularly as part of teaching her about money management. Jennifer took his license and examined it with the standard care that tellers were trained to use. David appreciated that his employees took security seriously. Identity theft was a real concern, and proper verification procedures protected both the bank and its customers. "And you'll be depositing cash today?" Jennifer asked, noting the $50 bill on the counter. "That's right," David confirmed. "Birthday money from her grandmother. Lily's very excited about watching her savings grow." Jennifer smiled at that, and David could tell she genuinely enjoyed the customer service aspect of her job. These were the kind of employees who made him proud to be in the banking business. People who understood that behind every transaction was a human story, a family goal, or a personal dream. The transaction should have been straightforward, a simple cash deposit to an existing account with proper identification provided. David had done similar transactions hundreds of times, both as a customer at other institutions before starting his own bank, and as an observer during his periodic branch visits. But as Jennifer typed information into her computer, her expression changed slightly. She glanced at his license again, then at her screen, then back at the license. David noticed her hesitation but wasn't immediately concerned. New employees sometimes needed extra time to navigate the system, and weekend shifts often meant working with skeleton crews who might be less experienced. "Is everything all right?" David asked politely. Jennifer looked up, and for the first time David detected something different in her expression. Not confusion about the computer system, but something else entirely. Something that made his stomach tighten with a feeling he knew all too well, even though he'd hoped never to encounter it in his own establishment. "I'm going to need to call my manager over," Jennifer said, her tone now noticeably cooler than it had been moments before. And in that instant, David realized that his quiet Saturday afternoon was about to become something much more complicated. The wait for the manager felt longer than it probably was. David stood at the counter, trying to maintain his usual calm demeanor while other customers continued their banking behind him. He could hear the normal sounds of a busy Saturday afternoon: conversations about mortgage rates, the click of calculator keys, children asking their parents when they'd be done. Jennifer had stepped back from her window, occasionally glancing in his direction while she organized papers that didn't really need organizing. David recognized the behavior. She was stalling, waiting for backup, treating him like a problem that needed to be solved rather than a customer making a routine deposit. When the manager finally appeared, David's heart sank a little. The man walking toward the counter had the kind of swagger that David had encountered too many times in his 42 years. Mid-40s, expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, and an expression that suggested he was already convinced he was dealing with trouble before he'd heard a single word of explanation. "I'm Robert Thompson, the branch manager," the man said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed designed to intimidate. "Jennifer tells me there's an issue with your transaction." David kept his voice level and professional. "No issue at all. I'm simply making a deposit to my daughter's savings account. I provided my identification and filled out the deposit slip correctly." Thompson picked up David's driver's license, holding it up to the light and examining it far more thoroughly than necessary. His scrutiny was obvious and deliberate, performed in full view of other customers who were beginning to notice the commotion. "This is a substantial deposit for a cash transaction," Thompson said, as if $50 was somehow suspicious. "We have policies about large cash deposits." David felt his patience being tested, but maintained his composure. $50 is hardly a large cash deposit by any reasonable standard. And I'm not a new customer. This is an established account with a clear history." "That may be," Thompson replied, "but we have to be careful about fraud. Identity theft is a serious problem, and we can't be too cautious when someone we don't recognize comes in making unusual transactions." The words hit David like a slap. Unusual transactions. Someone we don't recognize. The coded language was unmistakable, and the assumptions behind it were clear. Here was a black man in casual clothes, trying to deposit cash, and somehow that combination had triggered suspicions that wouldn't have existed for other customers. "I'd like you to explain exactly what makes this transaction unusual," David said, his voice still controlled but carrying a slight edge now. "I'm depositing birthday money into my daughter's savings account. The account is in good standing, I've provided proper identification, and the amount is modest by any measure." Thompson's jaw tightened. He clearly didn't appreciate being questioned, especially not by someone he'd already decided was a potential problem. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing here, but this ID looks suspicious to me. The signature doesn't match, and frankly, this whole situation doesn't add up." David glanced at the signature on his license, then at the deposit slip he'd signed moments earlier. They were identical, as they should be. Thompson was either lying or seeing what he wanted to see. Either way, the situation was escalating beyond anything David could have imagined when he'd walked through the doors 20 minutes earlier. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor," David said firmly. "I am the supervisor," Thompson shot back, "and I'm telling you that we're not processing this transaction. You can take your business elsewhere." The lobby had grown quieter now. Other customers were definitely watching, some with curiosity, others with obvious discomfort at the scene unfolding before them. David could see Jennifer behind the counter, looking increasingly uncomfortable but not intervening. 2 other tellers had stopped their own transactions to observe. David pulled out his phone. "Would it help if I called the main office to verify my identity? I can have someone confirm my account information and my relationship with the bank." "That won't be necessary," Thompson said quickly, almost as if he was afraid of what such a call might reveal. "What I need is for you to leave the premises before I call security." The threat hung in the air like a challenge. David felt the familiar surge of anger that came with being treated as a criminal for simply existing in a space where someone else thought he didn't belong. But beneath the anger was something else, a deep sadness that this was happening in his own bank, to his own customers, by his own employees. "Let me understand this correctly," David said, his voice carrying across the now quiet lobby. "You're refusing to allow me to make a $50 deposit to my daughter's savings account, based on your assertion that my valid driver's license is somehow fraudulent, despite having no evidence to support that claim." "I don't need to explain bank policy to you," Thompson replied. "Security policies exist for good reasons, and if you don't like them, you're free to bank elsewhere." David looked around the lobby at the faces watching this confrontation. He saw embarrassment on some faces, anger on others, and confusion on many. These people were witnessing something that shouldn't happen anywhere, but especially not in an institution that prided itself on serving everyone equally. "I'm not leaving," David said quietly but firmly. "I'm a customer with a legitimate transaction, and I have every right to be here. If you want me to leave, you'll need to explain exactly what policy I've violated and document your decision in writing." Thompson's face flushed red. The challenge to his authority, delivered in front of his staff and customers, had clearly pushed him past his breaking point. "Fine. You want documentation? I'll give you documentation." He turned toward Jennifer. "Call security and tell them we have someone refusing to leave the premises. And get me the police number. We've got a potential fraud situation here." The word sent a chill through the lobby. David heard someone gasp. Whether from shock at the accusation or at Thompson's handling of the situation, he couldn't tell. What he did know was that this had moved far beyond a simple banking dispute. Thompson was now threatening to have him arrested for trying to deposit his daughter's birthday money. David pulled out his business card and placed it on the counter. "Before you make that call, you might want to look at this." Thompson barely glanced at the card before pushing it back. "I don't care what fake credentials you've got. The police will sort this out." The irony was almost overwhelming. Here David stood in a bank he had built from nothing, being threatened with arrest by an employee whose salary he ultimately paid. Around him, customers who had trusted their financial futures to his institution were watching their CEO be treated like a criminal. But David knew that revealing his identity at this moment wouldn't solve the real problem. If Thompson was willing to treat any black customer this way, then the issue ran much deeper than one bad interaction. This was about systemic bias, unconscious prejudice, and the kind of institutional discrimination that David had spent his career fighting against. "Make your call," David said calmly. But I want every word of this interaction documented. I want to know exactly what policies you're citing, what evidence you have of wrongdoing, and what training you've received on customer service and anti-discrimination procedures." Thompson was already reaching for his phone, his hand shaking slightly. With anger or adrenaline, the lobby remained tense and quiet, as if everyone present understood they were witnessing something significant, even if they didn't fully understand what it was. David stood his ground, knowing that the next few minutes would reveal just how far his own employee was willing to go to avoid admitting he was wrong, and somewhere in the back of his mind he was already thinking about the conversations he would need to have, the policies he would need to review, and the changes he would need to make to ensure this never happened to another customer again. Thompson's fingers moved across his phone screen with the kind of aggressive purpose that made everyone in the lobby understand. This situation had reached a point of no return. David watched the man who was supposed to represent his bank's values, who was paid to provide excellent customer service, prepare to call the police on a customer whose only crime was wanting to deposit $50. "You know what?" Thompson said, holding up his phone like a weapon. "I've seen this before. People come in here with fake IDs trying to access accounts that don't belong to them. You probably found this guy's wallet and thought you'd try your luck." The accusation hung in the air like a poison. David felt his jaw clench, but he forced himself to remain calm. Around him, the other customers were no longer pretending not to watch. Some looked horrified, others confused, and a few seemed uncomfortable with the entire scene. "That's a serious accusation," David said quietly. "I hope you have evidence to support it, because making false claims about customers could have legal consequences." "Legal consequences?" Thompson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're the one who's going to face legal consequences when the police get here and sort out what's really happening." Jennifer, still standing behind her teller window, looked like she wanted to disappear. She kept glancing between Thompson and David, clearly uncomfortable with how the situation was developing but unwilling to challenge her manager's authority. David looked around the lobby again. An elderly woman near the loan officer's desk was shaking her head in obvious disapproval. A young father with his teenage son was whispering something about how wrong this looked. The college student who had been in line earlier was recording with his phone, probably for social media. "Sir?" came a new voice from behind the counter. A security guard had appeared. Not bank security, but a contract guard who worked weekends. He was probably in his 60s, with kind eyes and the demeanor of someone who had seen enough conflicts to know when something didn't feel right. "Officer Martinez," Thompson called out, his voice taking on a false friendliness. "We've got a situation here. This individual is trying to access an account with what appears to be fraudulent identification, and he's refusing to leave when asked." Officer Martinez looked at David, then at Thompson, then back at David. His years of experience had clearly taught him to read situations carefully before acting. "What exactly is the problem here?" David spoke before Thompson could interrupt. "I came in to make a $50 deposit to my daughter's savings account. I provided valid identification and filled out the deposit slip correctly. Mr. Thompson has decided, without any evidence, that my driver's license is fraudulent and that I'm attempting some kind of fraud." Martinez examined David's license carefully, then looked at the deposit slip. "This all looks legitimate to me. What specifically makes you think there's fraud involved?" Thompson's confidence seemed to waver slightly. "Well, the signature looks off and the whole situation seems suspicious. You can't be too careful these days." "The signature looks fine to me," Martinez said diplomatically. "And $50 isn't exactly the kind of amount that usually indicates fraud." He looked at David again. "Do you have any other identification?" David pulled out his credit cards, his business credit card, and several other pieces of ID. Martinez examined them all, clearly finding nothing suspicious. The security guard's calm professionalism was a stark contrast to Thompson's aggressive paranoia. "Everything here checks out," Martinez said to Thompson. "I don't see any reason why this transaction can't be processed." But Thompson had gone too far to back down now. His authority had been challenged in front of his staff and customers, and admitting he was wrong would mean acknowledging that his suspicions were based on something other than legitimate security concerns. "I don't care what you think," Thompson snapped at Martinez. This is my branch and I make the decisions about what transactions get processed. I'm calling the police. Martinez looked genuinely surprised. Sir, that might not be the best course of action. This gentleman has provided valid identification for a routine transaction. Calling the police could create problems for the bank. Are you questioning my judgment? Thompson's voice was rising now, drawing even more attention from customers and staff. I've been in banking for 12 years, and I know suspicious activity when I see it. David felt a mixture of anger and sadness wash over him. Here was an employee who was so committed to being right that he was willing to destroy his own career, rather than admit he had made assumptions based on prejudice. The tragedy was that Thompson probably didn't even recognize his own bias. Let me ask you something, David said to Thompson. If I were a white man in a business suit making this exact same transaction, would you be calling the police? That's not relevant, Thompson stammered. This isn't about race, isn't it? David asked. The question hung in the air, and everyone in the lobby seemed to understand exactly what was being discussed, even if Thompson refused to acknowledge it. A woman near the customer service desk spoke up. Excuse me, but this looks really bad. I've been banking here for 10 years and I've never seen anyone treated like this for such a small deposit. Ma'am, please stay out of this, Thompson said dismissively, but his authority was clearly eroding. More customers were beginning to voice their discomfort with what they were witnessing. Actually, I think I'll take my business elsewhere, said the young father with his teenage son. If this is how you treat customers, I don't want to bank here anymore. Same here, added another customer. This is disgraceful. Thompson was losing control of the situation on multiple fronts. His staff was watching him make decisions that went against everything they'd been trained to do. His customers were openly criticizing his handling of the situation, and the security guard he'd called for backup was clearly not supporting his position. Fine, Thompson said, his voice now carrying a note of desperation. Everyone can have their opinions, but I'm still calling the police, and I want all of you to stay here as witnesses when they arrive. He started dialing, his hands shaking slightly. David realized that Thompson was now trapped by his own stubbornness. The man had painted himself into a corner, where backing down would mean admitting he had treated a customer poorly based on racial bias, something he was psychologically unable to do. Before you complete that call, David said, I want you to think very carefully about what you're doing. You're about to call the police on a customer who has committed no crime, violated no policies, and provided valid identification for a routine transaction. When this is over, there will be consequences. Are you threatening me? Thompson demanded. I'm warning you, David replied. Not as a threat, but as someone who understands how banking regulations work, how discrimination laws apply, and how social media works in 2024. What you're doing right now will follow you for the rest of your career. Thompson's thumb hovered over his phone screen. For a moment, David thought the man might come to his senses, might realize that he was about to make a mistake that would change his life forever. But pride and prejudice won out over common sense. What's your emergency? Came the voice from Thompson's phone, loud enough for several people to hear. Yes, I need police at First Community Bank on Main Street. We have someone here refusing to leave, attempting fraud with fake identification. David closed his eyes for a moment, thinking about how he was going to explain to his daughter that her simple trip to the bank had turned into a national news story. How he was going to explain to his board of directors that their CEO had been arrested in his own bank. How he was going to explain to his employees that their institution had failed so completely in its mission to serve all customers equally. But then he opened his eyes and looked around the lobby at the faces watching this unfold. These weren't just witnesses to one man's poor judgment. These were people who understood that something fundamentally wrong was happening. People who were willing to speak up against injustice. People who expected better from the institutions they trusted with their money. Thompson finished his call and looked at David with a mixture of triumph and nervousness. They'll be here in a few minutes. We'll see what they have to say about your legitimate transaction. David nodded calmly. Yes, we will. What Thompson didn't know was that when The police arrived. They would find themselves in the middle of a situation that would make headlines across the country. And what he definitely didn't know was that the man he was having arrested was the same person who signed his paychecks. The tension in the lobby was thick enough to cut with a knife. Thompson stood behind the counter with his arms crossed, occasionally checking his phone for the time and glancing toward the front door, as if willing the police to arrive faster. David remained calm, leaning against the counter with the patience of someone who knew that truth eventually comes to light. Other customers had mostly finished their transactions, but several lingered, unwilling to leave in the middle of such a dramatic scene. The college student was still recording, his phone discreetly positioned to capture everything. Officer Martinez stood nearby, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but uncertain about how to de-escalate it further. Jennifer continued organizing papers that didn't need organizing, her discomfort growing with each passing minute. Every so often she would look at David with an expression that suggested she was beginning to doubt her manager's judgment, but she remained silent. Then, from the back office area, came the sound of heels clicking against the marble floor. Everyone turned to see a woman in her mid-30s approaching the counter area. She wore a professional navy blazer and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. Lisa Rodriguez had been assistant manager at this branch for 3 years. She'd worked her way up from teller to customer service representative to her current position through hard work and genuine care for both customers and colleagues. Saturday was normally her day off, but she'd come in to catch up on some paperwork and prepare for Monday's staff meeting. As she approached the counter area, Lisa could sense the tension immediately. She'd been in banking long enough to recognize when a situation had escalated beyond normal customer service issues. But it wasn't until she got closer that she could see the man standing at Jennifer's window. Her steps slowed, then stopped completely. David Williams, the CEO of First Community Bank, the man whose vision had created the institution where she worked, the person who had personally approved her promotion to assistant manager after reviewing her customer service scores and community involvement. Lisa felt her stomach drop as she took in the scene. Thompson standing aggressively behind the counter. Jennifer looking uncomfortable and uncertain. Officer Martinez positioned as if he expected trouble. And David, Mr. Williams, standing calmly but clearly being treated as some kind of threat. "Mr. Williams?" Lisa said, her voice carrying clearly across the now quiet lobby. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Thompson's aggressive posture crumbled. His arms dropped to his sides and his face went from flushed red to pale white in a matter of seconds. Jennifer's eyes widened as recognition dawned on her as well. Officer Martinez looked confused but alert, sensing that something significant had just changed. The customers who had been watching the confrontation suddenly understood that they had been witnessing something much more serious than a simple banking dispute. The college student's phone remained steady, capturing what was about to become a very different kind of story. "Hello, Lisa," David said with a slight smile. "I was just trying to make a deposit for my daughter, but Mr. Thompson seems to think my identification is fraudulent." Thompson's mouth opened and closed without any sound coming out. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff and had been arguing with gravity about whether or not he was going to fall. I didn't... How was I supposed to... Thompson stammered, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Lisa looked at the deposit slip on the counter, at David's driver's license still lying there, and at the $50 bill that had started this entire confrontation. "Mr. Thompson, this is David Williams, the Chief Executive Officer of First Community Bank." The words echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. Several customers gasped audibly. Jennifer's face went white. Officer Martinez immediately straightened up, clearly realizing that he had just witnessed a subordinate threaten to have his boss arrested. "Oh my God," Jennifer whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh my God. I'm so sorry, Mr. Williams. I didn't know. I should have. You should have processed a routine transaction for a customer with valid identification," David said gently but firmly. "That's what you should have done, regardless of who I am." Thompson seemed to be having trouble breathing. The full weight of what he had done was settling on him like a crushing load. He had not only treated a customer badly, he had treated the CEO of his own company like a criminal. He had called the police on his own boss. He had done all of this, in front of witnesses, including someone who was recording. "Mr. Williams, there's been a misunderstanding," Thompson finally managed to say. "I was just following security protocols. We have to be careful about fraud." "Security protocols?" Lisa interjected, her voice carrying a sharp edge. "What security protocols require you to refuse a $50 deposit from a customer with valid identification?" David held up his hand, signaling for Lisa to let him handle this. He looked at Thompson with the calm intensity of someone who had built a successful business by understanding people and their motivations. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to think very carefully about your answer to this question," David said. "What exactly made you suspicious about this transaction?" Thompson's eyes darted around the lobby, looking for support that wasn't coming. Officer Martinez was watching him with obvious disapproval. The customers were staring at him with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. His own staff members were looking at him like he had just destroyed his career in the most public way possible. The amount seemed large for cash," Thompson said weakly. $50 seemed large? David asked, and the ID looked suspicious. In what way? Thompson couldn't answer because there was no honest answer he could give. His driver's license was perfectly legitimate and everyone in the lobby knew it. "Let me ask you this," David continued. "In your 12 years of banking experience, how many white customers have you called the police on for making $50 deposits with valid identification?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, which in many ways it was. Thompson's silence was answer enough. Lisa stepped forward, her professional demeanor barely containing her anger. "Mr. Thompson, I think you need to step into the office while we sort this out." "Lisa, I can explain," Thompson said desperately. "This whole thing got out of hand. I was just trying to protect the bank." "Protect the bank?" Lisa's voice rose slightly. "You just called the police on our CEO. You accused him of fraud. You've created a scene that's probably being broadcast on social media as we speak. How exactly does any of that protect the bank?" David looked around the lobby at the faces watching this confrontation. He saw anger, embarrassment, and confusion, but he also saw something else. He saw people who understood that they had witnessed something important, something that revealed uncomfortable truths about assumptions and prejudice. "The police are probably still coming," David said calmly. "When they arrive, I'll explain the situation and send them away. But first, Mr. Thompson and I need to have a private conversation." Thompson nodded eagerly, probably hoping that a private conversation might save his job. But David's expression suggested that ship had already sailed. Officer Martinez approached David. "Sir, I owe you an apology. I should have recognized what was happening here." "You did fine," David replied. "You treated everyone fairly and tried to de-escalate the situation. That's exactly what security should do." Lisa looked at Jennifer, who was still standing behind her teller window looking traumatized. "Jennifer, why don't you take your break now?" Is my job safe?" Jennifer asked quietly. David looked at her thoughtfully. "That depends on what you learned from this experience and how you handle similar situations in the future." As the lobby began to return to something resembling normal, with Lisa directing customers to other tellers and Officer Martinez positioning himself discreetly near the entrance, David reflected on how quickly a simple banking transaction had revealed so much about his organization's culture. He thought about all the training sessions on customer service and anti-discrimination policies. He thought about all the meetings where they discussed treating every customer with respect and dignity. And he thought about how easily those principles had been abandoned when faced with a situation that triggered unconscious bias. Thompson stood waiting, probably rehearsing apologies and excuses that David had no interest in hearing. Because this wasn't really about Thompson anymore. This was about building a better institution, creating better policies, and ensuring that no customer ever faced what David had just experienced. The real work was just beginning. The manager's office felt smaller than usual with 3 people crowded inside. David sat calmly in the chair across from the desk, while Thompson fidgeted behind his own desk like a man preparing for his own execution. Lisa stood near the door, serving as both witness and buffer, her notepad ready to document what was certain to be a career-ending conversation. Through the glass walls of the office, they could see the lobby slowly returning to normal operations. The police had arrived 5 minutes earlier, and David had spoken with them briefly, explaining that it had been a misunderstanding and that no crime had been committed. The officers left looking confused but relieved that they didn't have to sort out what appeared to be a very complicated workplace situation. Thompson cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Williams, I want to start by saying how sorry I am. If I had known who you were—" "Stop right there," David interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "That's exactly the problem, Robert. Your apology shouldn't depend on who I am. Every customer who walks into this bank deserves the same respect and professional service, whether they're the CEO or someone making their first deposit." Thompson's face flushed. "Of course, you're absolutely right. I just meant—" "I know what you meant," David said, "and that's why we're having this conversation." Lisa looked up from her notepad. "Mr. Thompson, can you walk us through your decision-making process? What specifically made you treat this transaction as suspicious?" The question forced Thompson to confront the uncomfortable truth about his own assumptions. He shifted in his chair, looking everywhere except at David's face. "Well, it was a cash transaction, and cash transactions can be risky." "We process hundreds of cash transactions every week," Lisa pointed out. "What made this one different?" Thompson fell silent, trapped by the logic of his own stated reasoning. Everyone in the room knew the answer, but saying it out loud would mean acknowledging something he wasn't psychologically prepared to admit. David leaned forward slightly. "Robert, I've been in banking for nearly 20 years. I've seen discrimination take many forms, and I've worked hard to build an institution that serves everyone equally. What happened out there wasn't about bank security or fraud prevention. It was about assumptions you made based on how I looked. That's not—" Thompson started, then stopped. The protest died in his throat because even he couldn't make himself believe it. "Let me tell you what I saw," David continued. "I saw a black man in casual clothes being treated as a criminal for trying to deposit $50. I saw employees who were trained to provide excellent customer service instead choose to humiliate and threaten a customer. I saw the kind of institutional bias that drives people away from banking altogether." Thompson's shoulders sagged. The weight of his poor judgment was settling on him fully now, and there was no way to undo what had happened. "More importantly," David said, "I saw what any other customer in similar circumstances would have experienced. Do you have any idea how many people we've probably treated this way, without me being here to witness it?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. Lisa made notes, already thinking about the policy reviews and training programs that would need to be implemented immediately. David stood up and walked to the window overlooking the lobby. "This bank was built on the principle that everyone deserves access to quality financial services. We've invested millions in community outreach, financial literacy programs, and minority business development. All of that work becomes meaningless if our customers can't even make a simple deposit without being treated like criminals." Thompson tried one more time to salvage the situation. "Mr. Williams, I've been with the bank for 3 years. My performance reviews have always been good. This was just a mistake, a misunderstanding that got out of hand." David turned back to face him. "Robert, this wasn't a mistake. Mistakes are mathematical errors or filing something in the wrong folder. What happened out there was a choice. You chose to see a threat where none existed. You chose to escalate rather than de-escalate. You chose to call the police rather than process a routine transaction." "I can do better," Thompson pleaded. "I can learn from this. I can take training courses, sensitivity training, whatever you think is necessary." "I'm sure you could," David replied. "But that's not the point anymore. This isn't just about your personal growth or development. This is about the culture of this institution and the message we send to our community." Lisa closed her notepad, understanding that the conversation was reaching its conclusion. She had seen enough personnel actions to recognize when a decision had been made. David sat back down and looked directly at Thompson. "I'm terminating your employment with First Community Bank effective immediately." The words landed with finality. Thompson's face went white, then red, then white again. "Mr. Williams, please. I have a mortgage, car payments. My kids are in private school. Can't we work something out? Robert, 20 minutes ago you were willing to have me arrested for banking while black. You created a scene that humiliated not just me, but every customer who witnessed it. You've probably cost us several accounts already, and once this hits social media, the damage to our reputation will be significant." Thompson slumped in his chair, the full consequences of his actions finally hitting home. "What am I going to tell my wife? How do I explain this to my children?" David felt a momentary pang of sympathy, but it was tempered by the knowledge that Thompson's family wasn't the only one affected by his choices. "You'll figure that out. What I need you to figure out right now is how to transition your responsibilities to Lisa over the next hour." "An hour?" Thompson looked panicked. "Can't I have until the end of the week, or at least until Monday? You called the police on a customer making a $50 deposit," David said firmly. "Did you think there wouldn't be immediate consequences?" Lisa stepped forward. "Robert, I'll need access to all your current files, your computer password, and a briefing on any pending customer issues. Security will escort you out once we're finished." The practical details of termination began to take over. Thompson moved mechanically through the process of handing over his responsibilities, his earlier arrogance completely deflated. The man who had been so certain of his authority 30 minutes earlier now looked lost and confused. "For what it's worth," David said as they finished the transition, "I hope you learned something from this experience. I hope it makes you think about how you treat people who look different from you, who come from different backgrounds, who might not fit your assumptions about what a bank customer should look like." Thompson nodded mutely, unable to meet David's eyes. 20 minutes later, security escorted Robert Thompson out of the bank for the last time. David watched through the office window as the man who had threatened to have him arrested walked across the parking lot to his car, carrying a small box of personal items. Lisa knocked on the office door. "Mr. Williams? The staff is asking if you want to address what happened." David nodded. It was time to talk about the bigger picture, the systemic changes that needed to happen, the training that needed to be implemented. One termination wouldn't solve the problem of unconscious bias, but it would send a clear message about what the bank's values really meant. As he prepared to address his employees, David thought about his daughter Lily, whose $50 birthday deposit had started this entire chain of events. He thought about the lesson he would need to explain to her about fairness, respect, and standing up for what's right. But most of all, he thought about all the customers who looked like him, who had probably faced similar treatment at banks across the country, and who deserved better from institutions they trusted with their financial futures. The work of building a truly inclusive bank was far from over. If anything, today had shown him how much work still needed to be done. But at least, now he knew exactly what they were up against and exactly how high the stakes really were.